you thought global politics couldn't get any messier, buckle up, because the internet has been on fire after Donald Trump announced that the United States is banning South Africa from the 2026 G20 summit in Miami. And not just any Miami location, by the way. Trump plans to host world leaders at his own Trump National Doral Golf Resort. Yes, a whole global summit on a golf course. Only in America. But before we dive into the details, let's listen to what the people had to say.
I guess South Africa's not welcome to Miami, or at least not to Trump's golf club, where he'll be hosting the G20 summit next year. See, Trump uninvited South Africa from the 2026 G20 because of their horrific human rights abuses based on the completely false far-right conspiracy theory known as the white genocide theory, which claims that white South Africans are being targeted in racial killings. Meanwhile, back in reality, Trump has been hosting and on his knees for the Saudi crown prince and the jihadist terrorist leader of Syria in the Oval Office this month. Make this make sense. Both Syria and Saudi Arabia are some of the worst places on the planet for human rights abuses. But I guess those human rights abuses aren't being perpetrated against people who look like Trump, so they don't matter to him. It's not even clear if he can legally forbid South Africa from attending next year's G20 because they're just as much a member of the G20 as the United States is. They're also likely to have strong backing from the other members of the G20, almost all of whom praise their handling of this year's summit.
The pettiness of MAGA. Oh my God. So because they were offended about the G20 episode last week, they removed South Africa off AGOA. AGOA is the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which was enacted in 2000. So it was pretty much a law that gave preferential economic benefits for Africans who want to trade and do business with the USA. Now, back then, it probably seemed like a good thing. Oh, they're opening the market to us. Less charges, less stamp duties, da-da-da-da. But no, they use this as a weapon. If you don't do what they like, if you piss them off, they'll just remove you off AGOA. Then that's going to affect the economy and have ramifications on the South African economy. All this because Trump wanted to boycott the G20 in South Africa because he believes South Africa has a genocide happening. But that's not the case, as we all know. So he boycotted it. He didn't go. The people that went, they were so happy. Yo, you should have seen these leaders without Trump there. They were celebrating. I think one of the leaders was talking smack about Trump as well. Saying, listen, we don't need some big mouth baby billionaire causing trouble here. We've had a good meeting. We've had a good discussion. This is awesome without America. Yeah? So America felt left out. Then they were going to send someone, but it was too late. The president of South Africa laughed. Said, yeah, they said they're going to bring someone now to take the gavel because the next G20 is in America. But yeah, sorry, it's too late. So they didn't do the ceremony, the gavel passing ceremony. So because of that, he's pissed. He said, okay, I'm removing you off AGOA. I'm renewing it for other African nations. Screw SA, yeah? As an African, I'm happy they're doing this, yeah? Africans need to realize we can't rely on outsiders for the, the goodwill of outsiders. There's no goodwill. They just want to manipulate you and to take control of you, yeah? If you don't do what they like, they put sanctions. They cut you off, these AGOAs and all that nonsense. Is that business? Is that equality? No, there needs to be fairness, fair trade, fairness, okay? And I'm happy he's done that, so that's good. Now, SA, you know, you've got no friend. Americans, well, the government, I mean, is not your friend, South Africa, yeah? Actually, the whole continent, we all know now, America is not your friend. So fix up and trade together, because South Africa is going to go through some mad economic troubles because of this. And to him, it's just, yeah, because they pissed me off, I'm not going to give them a AGOA. Crazy.
Trump said the US is stopping payments to South Africa and they are banned from the G20. My brothers, this is why Africa must unite. Because it's clear the way you're dressed, that is how you'll be addressed. If we put our resources together, who will need the West? We will form G-Africa and tell Miami to keep their party.
The US just tried to kick South Africa out of the G20. Trump says South Africa won't get an invitation to the 2026 G20 because we refused to bow to his demands. He claims white farmers are being killed and land taken, a narrative many call false and racist. He even says South Africa is unworthy of membership anywhere. South Africa is a founding G20 member. We don't get invited We are part of it. The call-outs, the insults, the exclusions. It's not about the rules, it's about power. But if one country can kick out a founding member on a whim, how long till more nations get punished? Especially ones fighting for justice, equality, and global solidarity.
White South African refugees. Let's get into it. You may have heard this come up multiple times in the media as of recently, especially from our president.
It's a genocide that's taking place that you people don't want to write about, but it's a terrible thing that's taking place. And farmers are being killed. They happen to be white, but whether they're white or black makes no difference to me. But white farmers are being brutally killed, and their land is being confiscated in South Africa. And the newspapers and the media, television media, doesn't even talk about it.
There's a lot to unpack here as to why our administration prefers white asylum seekers and are bad-mouthing and painting black and brown asylum seekers and migrants in the wrong way. In his first presidency, President Trump didn't hide the fact that he thought that there were good countries and bad countries. He called Haiti and El Salvador shithole countries, whilst in the same sentence saying that we need more migrants from good places like Norway. White Afrikaners in South Africa fit the stereotype that many white ring governments around the world want in their country, and they have become the darlings. 3 decades ago, on April 27, 1994, after centuries of white rule, black South Africans voted in general elections for the first time. This marked the official end of apartheid rule, cemented days later when Nelson Mandela was sworn in as the country's first black president. Since the arrival of Dutch settlers in the 1800s and British colonists in the 1700s and 1800s, South Africa had been a project that subjected black people systematically segregationist laws and practices. But it was the adoption of apartheid in 1948 that codified and formalized these racist practices into law. It strictly separated people into separate classes based on their skin color, putting the white minority in the highest class, with all others, including black, indigenous, multi-race, multi-ethnic people, and descendants of indentured Indian workers below them. The Group Areas Act, people were legally segregated based on race and allocated into separate areas to live and to work. The law regulated non-white groups further away from developed urban areas. Black people in particular were housed under resource French townships far away from the center. From the late 1950s, some 3.5 million black South Africans were forced to relocate from urban areas, and some 70% of the population was squeezed into 13% of the country's most unproductive, uninhabitable land. Those who opposed these laws and refused to move had their homes forcibly demolished and were sometimes arrested and in prison. Black people, specifically men, worked in cities as a source of cheap labor, were required to carry pass books which dictated which areas they can move freely through. Under the separate amenities laws, public transportation, parks, beaches, theaters, restaurants, and other amenities were segregated racially, signs stating whites only, very similar to Jim Crow America. The story of apartheid in South Africa is not one that America is not familiar with, and one that America is not trying to go back to today, which adds another layer as to why these refugees are now being welcomed with open arms. South Africa reports over 20,000 killings and deaths a year. Of that, only around 50 were white South African farmers. But why is this story being painted? We have to get into the Land Expatriate Act. Expropriation Act number 13 was signed into law by President Cyril Ramaphosa in January, and it's meant to address the land inequalities that stem from apartheid and white supremacy. Nearly 400 years of Dutch and British colonial rule and four decades of apartheid saw waves of land grabs and mass evictions of black, Indian, and mixed race people to create a white-only area. The 1913 Native Land Act gave most farmland to whites, generally Afrikaners of Dutch and French descent, leaving just 13% to blacks. The 1950 Afrikaner National Party passed a law removing 3.5 million black people from their ancestral lands. Today, only 4% of privately held land is owned by black South Africans, who make up nearly 80% of the 60 million person population. When we look at the history of South Africa and we look at that very recent ending of apartheid, you have to understand why the magnitude of these white refugees being chartered in on a plane, being held at a press conference, being given land matters. Why does it matter? Let's cut to Acre Trader. What is Acre Trader? Acre Trader is an investment company based out of Ohio that invests in farmland, providing farmland and resources to people who want to farm. One of the initial investors in Acre Trader was none other than J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance, who's at the helm of their administration, who is now having all these farmers fail because the farmers didn't get continued subsidies. What happened when the farmers didn't get continued subsidies? The government is grabbing their land up. So we have Afrikaners who were farmers coming to America as refugees with skill sets to farm, and some of the initial investment group funds that came into this company were also from South Africa. Are we seeing the picture now? So we have the brown migrants and the brown workers who have been providing services to this country for centuries, how we get our goods, how we get our farmland tilled. And now we have white refugees who are okay because they're white. This country wants to go back to Jim Crow. White people in South Africa still exist in Jim Crow. I always say South Africa today is like America in the 1960s, 1980s, because of when apartheid ended. It ended in 1994. I was in primary school in 1994. It's insane to think about. But the more you know.
Donald Trump announced that South Africa will be barred from participating in next year's G20 summit, which he plans to host at his Trump National Doral Resort near Miami. Trump said he is also ordering an immediate halt to all U.S. payments and subsidies to South Africa. He framed the move as punishment for how South African authorities treated a U.S. representative at last weekend's G20 in Johannesburg, the first G20 ever held on the African continent, and one the United States boycotted entirely. Traditionally, the outgoing G20 host hands a symbolic wooden gavel to the country taking over the presidency. Because the U.S. skipped the Johannesburg summit, Washington asked to send an embassy official to receive it instead. South Africa refused, calling it an insult for President Cyril Ramaphosa to hand the gavel to what it viewed as a junior diplomat. Trump is now using that snub as the formal justification for excluding South Africa from the 2026 summit in Florida. But his broader argument is ideological. Trump again claimed that white Afrikaners in South Africa are being violently persecuted, with their farms seized and lives endangered, rhetoric that echoes years of far-right talking points about a supposed white genocide. South Africa's government, independent researchers, and even some Afrikaners themselves say there is no evidence of a genocide, and that overall crime affects black and white communities alike in a country still scarred by apartheid. Trump's administration has already moved U.S. policy in line with that narrative. Officials recently set the annual refugee cap at 7,500 and say most of those slots will be reserved for white South Africans. Earlier this year, the U.S. welcomed a group of 59 white South Africans as refugees, and a tiny number in global terms, but a powerful political symbol. Right? So the Johannesburg summit itself went ahead without the United States and produced a final declaration that leaned heavily into priorities pushed by developing countries, including climate finance and debt relief. Washington did not sign on, and now, as it assumes a rotating G20 presidency, it is moving to shut South Africa out of the next meeting altogether. And that leaves one of Africa's biggest economies publicly branded by a U.S. president as not worthy of membership anywhere, and raises a larger question that G20 partners will now have to confront. Is the forum about collective problem solving, or about who lines up with Trump's worldview? If you enjoyed this video, don't stop here, because we've got a whole playlist packed with context and updates just like this one. So click into the playlist, let it run while you work, cook, clean, or commute, and really get caught up. And make sure that you're following the Jazari Qual Show so that you don't miss the next breakdown. Hit follow, tap subscribe, and stay plugged in.
So when Trump suddenly said South Africa is not invited, the internet reacted exactly how you'd expect. People posted videos, essays, memes, rants, dance remixes, everything. And the comments? Brutal, hilarious, confusing, angry, and sometimes painfully accurate. Today we're breaking down what people online actually said, why this drama even exists, and what it means for South Africa, the US, and everyone caught in between. One person online put it perfectly when they said, "I guess South Africa is not welcome in Miami, or at least not at Trump's golf club." And honestly, imagine being a whole country and getting uninvited like it's a birthday party at Spur. But the reason people are reacting so strongly is because Trump says South Africa must be excluded due to human rights abuses, specifically referencing the far-right conspiracy known as the white genocide theory. According to this theory, white South Africans are being systematically hunted and killed. But independent researchers, the South African government, crime statistics, and even members of the Afrikaner community have all said there is no evidence of a genocide. South Africa does have serious crime issues, but those issues affect everyone, not just one racial group. So commenters asked the obvious question: if Trump really cares about human rights abuses, why is he on his knees for Saudi Arabia and Syria? That was an actual comment online. People pointed out that some of the worst human rights records in the world belong to countries Trump openly praises or hosts. Meanwhile, South Africa, a founding G20 member, is suddenly treated like it's some uninvited cousin who showed up without a gift. And here's the hilarious part. It's not even clear whether Trump can legally uninvite South Africa at all. The G20 is not America's WhatsApp group, where Trump is the admin. South Africa is a founding member, just like the United States. You don't get invited, you're already on the list. The only way a country gets kicked out is if the entire G20 votes, and that has never happened in the history of the forum. So people online were like, is Trump confusing the G20 with his country club again? Another major point people brought up was the AGOA situation. One user said, the pettiness of MAGA is insane. Because they were offended by last week's G20 episode, they removed South Africa from AGOA. Whether that decision is final or still politically contested, the anger online was real because AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, benefits African countries by giving them easier access to the U.S. market. But critics have always argued that AGOA can be used as a geopolitical weapon. If a country does something Washington doesn't like, poof, benefits gone. As one African TikToker said, these agreements are not friendship. They're leverage. If you don't do what they want, they put sanctions. They cut you off. Then he added, Africans must learn we have no friends out there. The whole continent needs to unite and trade with each other, because America is not your friend. And trust me, that video went viral fast. Another creator took things even further, saying, if Africa unites, we won't need the West. We'll form G-Africa and tell Miami to keep their party. And honestly, a G-Africa summit would slap. Imagine 50 countries pulling up, drumsers, Jolliffe versus Pap contests. Now that's a summit. But the deepest conversations online centered around asylum and race. Trump has repeatedly said white South African farmers are being brutally killed and need America's protection. Supporters of this theory argue that these farmers deserve refugee status in the U.S. But critics online pointed out the political pattern. This administration paints black and brown migrants as criminals, invaders, or economic burdens, while white asylum seekers are welcomed with open arms. One commenter broke it down powerfully. South Africa today is like America in the 1960s. Apartheid just ended in 1994, so when white refugees arrive, they're coming from a social system America is currently trying to slide back into. That hit a lot of people hard. Others brought historical context. They reminded viewers that apartheid wasn't 300 years ago. It ended 30 years ago. Many of the people alive today lived through it, including the white families now seeking asylum. And this matters because the land redistribution debate is a major reason white South Africans are applying for refugee status. South Africa's new Expropriation Act is meant to fix deeply unequal land ownership created by colonialism and apartheid. But online, people argued the U.S. government is using this situation to boost its own farming interests. One viral breakdown explained how U.S. investors, including people connected to the current administration, have ties to companies investing heavily in farmland. So if you bring over farmers with generations of agricultural skills, give them land, give them subsidies, suddenly you have a workforce with expertise ready to plug into America's food system. Meanwhile, black and brown migrants who harvest America's crops today are villainized. That contrast hit a nerve online. Back to the G20 drama. One thing people kept repeating is that the entire situation started months earlier, when Trump boycotted the 2025 G20 summit in Johannesburg because of the white genocide conspiracy. Other world leaders attended and apparently enjoyed themselves so much that people joked the event felt peaceful without American chaos. South Africans joked that the energy was more relaxed and productive. And when it came time to pass the ceremonial gavel, something every outgoing host does, the U.S. suddenly asked to send a lower-ranking official to accept it. South Africa refused. They said it would be disrespectful to lower the standard for such an important moment. And honestly, they weren't wrong. But that rejection is now the official reason Trump says the U.S. is banning South Africa from the 2026 summit. Online, people rolled their eyes so hard they nearly went blind. One user posted, "So this whole international crisis is because they didn't want to hand the gavel to some random embassy dude?" Another wrote, "Trump turned global diplomacy into WWE drama." And the final point that brought everything together was this. If a founding G20 member can be removed just because one president is angry, then the whole purpose of the G20 falls apart. It stops being a platform for solving global problems and becomes a platform for personal grudges. People online said, today it's South Africa, tomorrow it's any country Trump doesn't like. And in a world dealing with climate change, global debt, conflict, inequality, and inflation, the last thing we need is world leaders fighting over golf courses, gavels, and conspiracy theories. So what does all this mean? It means the internet isn't just dragging Trump. They're having real conversations about global power, racism, economic leverage, and Africa's future. Whether you agree or disagree with the opinions people shared online, the message is clear. The world is paying attention, and South Africa's role in global politics is bigger than people think. If you enjoyed this breakdown, keep watching and stay plugged in, because the story of Africa on the world stage is only getting started.